The next part of budgeting we're going to talk about is what's called the variance in budgeting. So let's go ahead and get into what that would be. So at the very top, it says, what is variance? But we're going to talk about the different steps and where variance kind of fits in those steps. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to create a budget. You're going to create a budget of what you think you spend your money on, how much you spend in each category. Then you're going to keep track of all your expenses. So the budget doesn't do you any good if you're not tracking your expenses and seeing if you're actually following that budget. The next thing you're going to do after you track your expenses is you're going to find what's called the variance. And the variance is the difference between what you budgeted and what you actually, and the money you actually spent. So how much did you budget? What did you actually spend? Was your budget correct? Did you spend more? Did you spend less? So the variance is just how much difference, how much more or less did you spend versus what you planned on spending, your budget versus the actual. Then once you find the variance, the point of the variance is to then make some adjustments so that you can have your budget be as accurate as possible. So your budget is like an ongoing changing thing. It always is changing depending on what your circumstances are. It might be the same for a few months, but there are always changes and you're always trying to make it better and better so that your budget is actually matching what you're actually spending. So how do we find the variance? It's pretty simple. You just have to remember the steps. All you're doing is taking the budget amount and subtracting the actual spent. Like what did you budget minus what you spent? So you have to plan stuff, then you have to keep track of what you spent and just subtract those two numbers. When you find variance, your answer is either going to be positive or negative. So if it's positive, that's good. That means you had money left over. You are under budget because you had money left over. So this is a good thing. If it is negative, a negative number, that means you went over your budget and you spent too much money. So you spent too much money if you are over your budget. So positive is good, you have money left. Negative is not good, you spent too much money in that category. One other thing, you could get zero. So this isn't on your paper. If you just want to write yourself a note off to the side, if you get zero, zero is not positive or negative, first of all. So not positive or negative. So if your variance equals zero, it's not positive or negative. It just means you're exactly on budget. You spent exactly what you planned on spending. So on your assignment, it has one section, the back page, it says list or name all the ones that had a positive variance, name all the ones that have a negative variance. If you get zero, zero is not positive or negative. So if you get zero, don't write that under the positive, don't write it under the negative because it's neither positive or negative. So if you ever get zero as a variance, just know it is not positive or negative. It's just zero. It's just exactly right on. So it's not positive or negative. So what we're going to do today is we're going to find the variance in certain categories. So this specific example just says find the variance for each category in the budget below and determine if you're over or under your budget in each category. All you're going to do is do the amount you budgeted and subtract the amount you spent. We're just subtracting those two numbers. So we're going to take 228. You always have to do the budget number first minus the amount we spent. So minus 245. So we would do that. And that gives us a negative $17. And if it's negative, that means we spent too much. So we were over budget. Over budget means we spent too much. So we're going to do the same thing for the next one. So 323.64 minus 298.76. And you just type that in your calculator. So that gives me $24.88. That's positive, which means that's good. We were under budget because we had a positive number. So over if you have a negative, under if it's positive. So if you want to write that in your notes, it would be very helpful for you if you forget. So let's do the next one. So 631.30 minus 601.30. So this gives me a positive $30. So again, we are under budget. Because it is positive, that means we're under budget. We have money left over. So then the same thing for entertainment, 178 minus 195. Make sure you put it in that order. 178 has to be first. That gives me a negative $17. So if it's negative, I spent too much. I went over budget. That's because it was negative. So I'm just putting negative there so I remember. I spent too much money. That means I went over what I planned on spending. And then pocket money, I have 50 minus 65.75. So if I subtract those, I get negative 15.75. So it is negative. So I went over budget because it is negative, which means I spent too much money in that category. And that's all you have to do for variance. If we were doing our full budget, we would find the variance and then we would make some adjustments based on if we were over or under our budget. But just finding variance, all we have to do is do that subtracting.